In December 1972, the Air Force funded a program to place a gas dynamic laser aboard a flying test bed, the Airborne Laser Laboratory. One key architect of Pratt Whitney's laser program was William Missimer.
Actually, after we lost the engine contract for the Space Shuttle main engine to Rocketdyne, it was a big blow to the company, and but we had developed facilities and capabilities in the area that fit the type of laser that was in vogue at that time very well. It was a gas dynamic laser, which, believe it or not, from a propulsion standpoint, is almost like a rocket engine. It's had some cryogenic fluids and had very tight tolerances. And the only thing that was new to us and foreign was the optics part. One of my first jobs was setting up the optics for some of these tests. And I remember we had the Army in one day, and they set up their experiment downrange. I think it was a tank or a piece of a tank or something. And we had set up the telescope, and there was a wind blowing quite a bit. We all went up to the control room, closed up, buttoned up the facility the same way you would for a rocket test. It's all remote controlled. And the Army guys were sitting there, and we pressed the button, and the laser came on, and the beam didn't appear for a while downrange. And then all of a sudden it was there, and it did its thing. Couldn't figure out what the delay was. So I went down, and here the wind had blown the door shut, on the steel door shut on the telescope room, and that Hummer burned a hole through the door and then went downrange and did its job. Well, after we did the initial research work on what was then called the XLD-1, that was a 1 megawatt boilerplate laser that we put into E8 stand, and proved the capability of the high energy lasers, the Air Force got very interested in a lightweight version of that would go into a modified 707 airplane. But then the challenge became, how do you lightweight this thing so it's flyable and also make it safe? Now here's where the jet engine smarts came in, because they looked at Pratt as being able to man-rate something from a safety standpoint, which was extremely important. They could not, or we could not, afford any kind of an accident in flight with this demonstrator, even though it was a highly classified program. So we won the contract, and in those days it was a pretty sizable contract, to make this a flyable, lightweight system.
In 1973, General Dynamics chose the F-100 engine for the YF-16, its entry in the Air Combat Fighter competition. The YF-16 won the competition in early 1975, and Pratt & Whitney's F-100 was a key part of its success. That same year, the F-100 further proved its quality when the F-15 Streak Eagle set 8 time-to-climb records. In its final flight, the Streak Eagle accelerated from a dead standstill on the runway to 98,424 feet, 19 miles straight up in less than 3.5 minutes. This smashed the MiG-25's old record by nearly 30 seconds. 4 NATO countries, Norway, Denmark, the Netherlands, and Belgium, had recently formed a consortium to seek a new fighter. The performance and cost of the new F-16 and its F-100 engine caught their eye. As an incentive, Pratt & Whitney and General Dynamics offered an unprecedented international co-production agreement, and the F-16 was quickly flying with and being co-produced by our allies. Now, with East Hartford's TF-30 and FRDC's F-100, Pratt & Whitney held the enviable position of powering the 3 best fighters in the free world: the F-14 Tomcat, the F-15 Eagle, and the F-16 Fighting Falcon. To meet the demands of the F-100 program, FRDC had grown further, and in 1976, as part of a major reorganization, it was renamed Pratt & Whitney Government Products Division. The new division was given management responsibility for all military engine programs, including the J-52, J-57, J-75, EF-30, and others. By 1978, our 20th anniversary, things had changed dramatically for the company and the nation. The fuel crisis of the 70s affected our economy and our psyche. Our cars reflected that change. The great land yachts and gas-guzzling muscle cars of the 60s were giving way to smaller, more fuel-efficient cars, many more of them with foreign names. 4 years earlier, after more than a decade of fighting, the Vietnam War had reached a dismal end. Public sentiment was now strongly against military spending and military involvement. Interest rates were rising, and the country was slipping into recession. It profoundly affected the way consumers made their purchases. Pratt Whitney's biggest consumer, the U.S. government, was no exception. Pratt & Whitney had been riding high on the new F-100 contracts, had slowly lost touch with the customer's needs, and was in for a shock. Frank McAbee had just become president of GPD.
Traditionally, when you won a military engine contract, you had that business and your business base that you could forecast, and you knew you were going to have the production volume in future years to support you. That particular tradition was about to change, though, and was changing very rapidly in the early 80s. When I became president of GPD, it had almost reached the boiling point. Those of us who worked in Washington were well aware of the fact that the F-100, which had just been introduced into service, while it was performing beautifully, was having some problems. We knew that the military was not particularly happy to have those problems, which the opponents to the military program in the Congress could use as an example of how the military really didn't know how to run a program and that everything they did turned out bad. So the pressure was on both sides. We knew that the military was seriously considering giving some of our business to GE. We knew that GE had developed their F-110 engine in competition with the F-100 earlier on, and that they had continued to develop it to some degree with their own company money to have in case our engine didn't work out. And they pursued a very active and vigorous lobbying campaign with both the Congress and the military to displace us, to show that our problems were bigger than we were able to handle. Any issues that arose where there was any type of question as to Pratt & Whitney's responsiveness to the government's problems or to the military's problems, competition obviously took advantage of that and played that up. So it was a very tense time. And the engine was working fine. It was actually working too well because it had such a high thrust-to-weight ratio, so much better than any previous engine, that the pilots and the operating units were flying the airplane well outside the envelope. They never wanted to pull the throttle back. They wanted to use the afterburner a lot. And you know how pilots are. They're like the rest of us. They like sports cars, and they want to zoom around the sky. But as a result of that, the engine was being pushed beyond some of its design limits, and it was having some premature failure. So we had that to contend with. The Air Force, in the meantime, had decided that the way to get our attention, perhaps, to threaten to give part of the business to GE. Our management did not respond well to that. We just didn't understand, and I'm sure that it wasn't unusual that anyone would have understood that particular circumstance, that we had won the competition. It was our engine. We would fix the problem. So why not just leave us where we were? Leave us alone. Let us do the job. Just give us money and go away, which is not all that different than the Pratt attitude over the years. In any event, the Air Force decided they were going to run a competition, and thus began the Great Engine War, as it's known. It was Pratt against GE, and the proposal that we submitted was based on, to a great degree, us getting all the business, and that really wasn't what the customer wanted, and as a result, GE was given 65% of the contract the first year. That was a great disappointment. It was a tremendous shock to us, to everybody in the plant, everybody. A lot of gloom and doom.
The Great Engine War, as it came to be known, had a profound influence on every aspect of GPD's existence. Winning back the customer's confidence was not an easy task. It required a drastic change in corporate culture. Quality, customer support, and cost were critically examined and constantly emphasized at every level of business. The company even tried to change their image with a modernized version of the logo. Employees were less than happy. To counter the antipathy that had evolved, Pratt Whitney began sending engineers and designers to air bases to see their products in real-life operation. Air Force and Navy aircraft were brought to the Florida facility so employees could see the end results of their labors and meet the men who flew them.
I remember the first time we had an F-14 come into GPD. The pilot of that airplane was named Hank Kleeman, Commander Hank Kleeman. He had been the pilot who shot down a Syrian jet about 6 months or a year prior to the time that he visited the plant here. He was a hero. He came here with his radar officer, the other member of the crew. They landed at Gwynn, and we towed the airplane up in front of the plant, and then the two pilots went around and talked to people. And I'll never forget, there was a lady who worked in plant engineering. Not a very high position, but nonetheless a good employee. And she broke into tears while she was talking to Hank Kleeman. She was so proud of the part that she had played, that Pratt Whitney had played, and that victory that Kleeman was part of, that she actually broke down and cried. And to me, that was a tremendous insight into the value of having people feel part of what you're doing.
Eventually, the company proved their new demeanor was real, and the traditional logo was restored. This process of soul-searching, of analysis of attitudes, reached beyond the customer. At this point, Bill Missimer was executive vice president.
When Harry Gray came to UTC, before that was actually United Aircraft, he brought with him the many new ideas, one of which was to make profit centers, and that's when we became Government Products Division. And another one was he had a code. He said that we have a responsibility to customers, shareholders, employees, and the community. Bill Dwyer was an exceptionally fine individual who fit his role as Vice President for Community Relations extremely well. And he was a very humorous guy. He always had an appropriate joke. He was an outstanding speaker, and you could tell that he loved people. He got us involved with, obviously, United Way. He was involved with the Urban League, Special Olympics. Some of his legacies today, the science fair, for example, that the engineers do such a good job of encouraging, are all legacies of Bill Dwyer. He was very well thought of in the community, and as you know, there's now a senior high school named in his honor, not too far from here.
Through the late 70s and the 80s, improvements continued on the F-100, and it grew into a family of engines. The PW200 model featured performance and durability improvements. In part, these improvements came from new materials laboratory innovations, like RSR and Gator Guard, an improved plasma spray coating system that found many uses. RSR was an innovative method for processing inert powdered metal alloys. Bill Moore explains.
RSR stands for Rapid Solidification Rate, and you make powder under inert conditions. We invented a machine, our boys came up with a fantastic machine for making powder and rapidly solidifying it. What happened was it consisted of a spinning disc, and the metal would be poured in a vacuum chamber from the crucible into a nozzle. onto a spinning disc. And the rotation of the disc, centrifugal force, throws the metal out in 360 degrees all around. And then we had a blast of argon, or circular curtain, around the spinning disc in order to increase the speed of solidification. And what we were doing was, as we had always done since the J-58 development, we were reaching for a stronger turbine blade material using the RSR.
East Hartford's materials laboratory created another breakthrough technique: single crystal turbine blades. This innovation was quickly adapted for use in military engines and dramatically increased the hot section life of the F-100. The development of single crystal blades, coupled with a new digital electronic engine control, the DEC, ushered in the F-100 PW220. The PW220 set a new standard for durability, reliability, and safety. Work also continued on a higher thrust version of the F-100. With almost 5,000 pounds more thrust, PW229 entered operational service in the F-15E and the F-16C by the end of the decade. A 20,000-pound thrust straight turbojet version of the F-100, the PW1120, was not so lucky. It was selected to power Israel's Lavi fighter, but that program died in the Israeli Knesset. Two other programs of the 80s did not fare well either. GPD developed the PW3005 for the V-22 Osprey, the T-800 for the Army's LHX helicopter. Both these turboshaft engines lost their competitions. During this decade, the Navy began re-engining F-14s with GE's F-110, and production finally ended for the venerable J-52 used in the A-6 Intruder and EA-6B Prowler. For the first time since Pratt Whitney's founding, the company was no longer building engines for the U.S. Navy. NASA was now seeking improved turbopumps for the Space Shuttle main engine. Current Rocketdyne pumps had to be rebuilt after each flight. John Balaguer was the division executive vice president at the time.
And liftoff. There became an opportunity, which was called the alternate turbopump program for the Rocketdyne engine with power separation. And we went after that tooth and nail. That was the program that we felt we had to win in order to start our space program growth that we so desperately needed. And we worked very hard on that. We brought in a lot of people who were very knowledgeable in the industry, people who had retired, people who were out of NASA and retired, to put together one of the best proposals I think I've seen. We won.
Pratt & Whitney resumed work on their SSME pumps and was now able to offer NASA turbopumps that could fly 55 missions between overhauls. But much development work still lay ahead. The RL-10 was continually evolving too, and an unparalleled success record. Over 500 successful firings in space.
We have 2 Centaur engines up and running.
Space provided another outlet for the company's technical excellence and creativity. NASA tapped Pratt & Whitney to develop an engine for the proposed National Aerospace Plane. The NASP stretched the boundaries of conventional engine design. The aircraft was designed to take off and land like a conventional airliner at existing airports, but would fly to the very edge of space at speeds of Mach 25. It called for an engine of unprecedented versatility, one that would start as a conventional turbojet, convert to a ramjet, and ultimately to a true rocket engine. Pratt & Whitney had one of the country's few Cray supercomputers. Design work that would have taken years was condensed into months. New materials and concepts were explored. Subscale testing was already underway when congressional budget cuts put the program on hold. The nature of air warfare was evolving in the early 80s, and agility was becoming an increasingly important issue. Research began on vectoring nozzles for jet engines. Roger Bursey was in charge of this program.
Well, there was a lot of discussions back in the 60s by a German aerodynamicist, Dr. Wolfgang Herbst. He felt that the new aircraft of the future had to have a lot of agility. And In the upper left-hand corner where there's a minimum of aerodynamic power, he felt that some maneuvers would enhance the agility of aircraft in that what was known as the post-stall region of the flight envelope. And he felt that one of the means of achieving this agility was to have the use of the thrusts of the engines to augment the aerodynamic surfaces. In order to accomplish that, it could have been done with a series of external paddles that could deflect the thrust. However, that was cumbersome, added weight, added drag. Hence, the aerodynamicists of that era determined that if we could come up with a system to vector the thrust of the engine and have it transparent to the pilot, we could accomplish those feats. With that in mind, our advanced technology team here started a series of testing with scale models, and then eventually led to a very successful flight test. And I can recall the first flight. It was absolutely rewarding on May 10th, 1989, at Edwards Air Force Base to see the two-dimensional nozzle fly. The folks indicated that if now we had the success of taking thrust vectoring into the pitch mode, and they says, if we can do this, why can't we do this? And that's called the yaw mode. Coupled with the pitch and the yaw, we says, if you can do both, why can't you have a multi-axis thrust vectoring? So we launched a review in 1992 with a ground demonstrator made up for various components and successfully demonstrated the multi-axis thrust vectoring.
The Air Force's changing mission meant quicker response time on a global scale. The current generation of airlifters was not versatile enough to meet the new demands. Design work began on the C-17, an aircraft capable of moving huge loads anywhere in the world and landing on short, unimproved strips practically at the front lines. Pratt Whitney developed a militarized version of the proven PW-2037, the F-117. It provided the power, durability, and reversing capability needed by the Globemaster III. By the end of the 80s, the F-100 and the F-15 would have seen 15 years of service. By the new millennium, it would be over a quarter-century old, ancient by fighter aircraft standards. Quietly in the background, work was underway on a superb new fighter engine, next generation beyond the F-100. Guiding this effort was Frank Gillette.
We built this engine on the information that we got out of the ATAG program, which is Advanced Technology Engine Gas Generator. At our plant, we call it 689. The compressor, the combustor, and turbine were designed before 83 that we just picked up and just refined so that we had a real good common core, which gave us a basis to do everything. Our design objectives at that time was a balanced design. We wanted cost, we wanted durability, and of the most important we wanted to do this time that hadn't been done is increase our supportability. Of the performance, we wanted the highest specific thrust engine that has ever been made. We ran our first demo engine in October of 1986, and it was a thrill to see this very powerful engine run down in the test stand with a 2D CD nozzle. It was very exciting for us, and we were very proud of all the work and accomplishments of our people.
The PW-5000 was well underway when the government announced a competition for an advanced tactical fighter to replace the aging F-15 in the next century. Two aircraft company teams, led by Northrop and Lockheed, would compete along with two engine manufacturers. Each engine would fly in both aircraft. It was Pratt & Whitney versus General Electric again. The PW-5000 officially became the YF-119, and design and testing shifted into high gear.
The airplane wanted supersonic persistence. And that means an airplane can go faster than Mach 1 without using the afterburner. And that was the exciting thing. That's the big change in technology that the ATF would have over any other airplane. In other words, the ATF, or now the F-22, can fly the same place that an F-15 can go without using the afterburner. The other big change to this airplane is low observables, which means a stealthy airplane. And we've accomplished that over a lot of technology and a lot of luck. This will be an awesome airplane. This airplane will be as good as an F-117 stealth fighter, but it'll go supersonic and it'll turn and burn, and it'll put an air dominance into this United States that we will always have superiority. We won't need to talk about superiority, we'll talk about air dominance.
1988, our 30th year in Florida. The facility was now called Pratt Whitney Government Engine Business. With the advent of détente, the old Soviet peril that had driven so many of our enterprises was rapidly diminishing and would soon vanish.
The aerospace industry had a saying, and it was that we've lost our army. It required that we do some major restructuring of the company, and we did. Unfortunately, we were not unique. We ended up in our restructuring program, which at that time was not called a restructuring program, but today it's a household word. We lost about a third of our business, and we lost about a third of our resources. Most of that was people. I think we handled those restructuring actions in probably the best humane way we could. We spent a lot of time making sure that the hurt to people was minimized, and it still hurt. At least we knew we had done the best job we could to minimize that and to try to keep families whole and move on. So it was a tough time for Pratt Whitney, especially tough for the military side of the business. And the Air Force picture, the U.S. Air Force picture, was not pretty, which was our #1 customer. So we really focused on international sales, which were really probably the savior and a large part of the F-100 program. We did very well in the international campaigns. Not that we won them without some difficulty and some financial contribution, but we did do very, very well as a team. We were able to bring in additional volume to put in on top of the U.S. Air Force domestic volume. At the same time, we wanted to be sure that we didn't lose sight of the ultimate goal, which we've been working on for many years. Under the leadership of people like Frank Gillette and Gary Plord, we're working the next engine, the next advanced engine, for what that program was called at that time was the Advanced Tactical Fighter.
Contrary to public euphoria, the end of the Cold War revealed a world more unstable and full of unconfined threats. A nation was reawakening to its resolve as a world leader. Pratt & Whitney's Florida facility had responded to the challenges of the previous decade. A spirit of teamwork that exemplified the early days of FRDC was reborn. New prizes were there for the company to win, if they proved worthy. In 1990, as Pratt & Whitney accelerated their pursuit of space business, United Technologies formed Space Propulsion and Systems, uniting its Chemical Systems Division and United Space Boosters Industries with Pratt & Whitney's space business. Doug North became its president. As the decade closed, ATF flight competition was underway, and problems that emerged were corrected, often with the help of the advanced computing power now available, but also by the instincts of good people.
Well, my closest moment, I'll have to say, during the 15 years of being engineering manager of the 119, was an engine called YF4. It was the first engine that went into supposed to go into the YF-22. We had run the engine down here to pass our qualifications to ship it to Edward. Then the engine passed the qualification. This was on a Thursday, and the C-141 was supposed to come in on Tuesday of the next week. So we had a lot of work to do to get ready, packed to go out. And obviously, GE was already flying in the YF-22, and we had to fly to be a winner. This guy came up and still kept telling me the engine wasn't right. On Friday, we decided to take the engine apart, and I know a lot of people didn't agree with that, but these two guys really instilled in me we should do it. We took the engine apart, and we found out that on the #2 bearing support, we had left all the bolts out, and the only thing that was holding this engine was the snaps. So we saw that on Saturday morning. Thank goodness with the persistence of these people, we put those bolts in, passed the test, packed that engine up on Saturday night, had it ready Monday. The plane came in on Tuesday. We flew it out to Edwards, and that engine was the first one to go fly with engine number 5 in YF-22. So the lesson I learned is listen to your people. Without that, this engine on the first roll-up is probably going to come out the inlet. We could have lost the contract. We could have not been here in Florida enjoying this great reputation we have. So what I learned out of that is listen to the workers. When they've got a gut feeling and data that says to change it, please listen and change it. Probably the most exciting times in my life is to go out and see the YF fly for the first time. Very emotional. Brings tears to your eyes. I have trouble talking about it right now. And then we flew the YF-22, and that was really thrilling.
Finally, on April 6, 1991, came the announcement we had waited for. Lockheed's F-22 would be the new air dominance fighter for the 21st century, and Pratt & Whitney's F-119 would give it the needed muscle.
We won the honor to power the ocean.
PYBBN vectoring nozzles were undergoing flight evaluation on the F-15 Active and would soon be installed on the F-16 Vista, setting the stage for a new generation of thrust vectoring engines and aircraft. The SSME turbopumps also progressed through critical testing here and at NASA facilities. Finally, on July 13, 1996, a single Pratt & Whitney alternate SSME oxidizer turbopump flew aboard the Space Shuttle.
And liftoff of Space Shuttle Discovery to complete NASA's constellation of tracking stations in the sky.
By year's end, another shuttle flight carried Pratt & Whitney pumps on all 3 main engines. Work was also well underway to certify the fuel turbopumps. The space business was growing. There was potential to help make up for decreased military spending, but it required a radical business approach.
We felt that we were lacking in having no resources dedicated to large liquid boosters, which were, from everything we could see, the booster of the future. There was no money to develop one in the United States. NASA didn't have the money. We certainly couldn't fund a program to develop a new booster engine. It was just too expensive. We examined the Russian stable of technology and engines they had, and we found that there was an excellent engine put out by Energomash, a company just outside of Moscow. And that engine led to developing a 2-barrel version of that 4-barrel RD-170, which was called the RD-180.
Pratt & Whitney entered into a joint venture with Russia's NPO Energomash to adapt and market Russian RD-120 and RD-180 rocket engines. It was a high-risk gamble, considering the unsettled nature of Russia's new politics. But NPO Energomash is the acknowledged world leader in heavy-lift liquid-fuel rocket engines. The RD-120 arrived at the Florida facility, was mounted in the E-8 test stand, and on October 11, 1995, became the first Russian rocket engine ever fired in the U.S.
Start. 1, 2, 3.
The much larger RD-180 produces nearly 1 million pounds of thrust and has already been selected for the Atlas 2AR and 3A launch vehicles. The RD-180 has also been selected to power the new EELV, the Evolved Expendable Launch Vehicle. Now, with nearly 600 successful firings. Since its inception, Pratt & Whitney's space propulsion efforts existed to serve government customers and operated in conjunction with the jet engine side of the business. Now, with a renewed commitment to space propulsion, a broader base of products, and a rapidly growing commercial market, the company created a new business unit, Pratt & Whitney Liquid Space Propulsion. Angie Negron is the Vice President and General Manager of LSP.
We have been very active in hypersonics. We have 2 active programs, demonstrator programs, one of them for the Air Force Research Lab, and a derivative of that program is called the ARMED program. Both of those use kerosene fuel and are storable. And again, they really are opportunities that we see to grow this business. The RL-10 has been around for 40 years. And the idea of replacing the RL-10 is somewhat sad, but also, I think, sends a real message that Pratt & Whitney is serious about the space business. I've gotten tentative approval, and it has to go to the board, to build an engine that we call CCAWS, Commercial Cryogenic Advanced Upper Stage Engine. I think we have the most determined people that I have ever worked with. And as a result of that, they are continuously beating at my door to talk to me about new things and new ways that we can grow this business. You know, they've seen the potential, they've had the vision, and they've just been waiting for the company to catch up.
Even after nearly a quarter century, the venerable F-100 was still evolving. PW-229A adapts F-119 fan technology for a thrust increase up to 34,000 pounds, 10,000 pounds more than the original F-100 of 1974. It offers improved maintainability and is a strong contender in Pratt & Whitney's growing overseas marketing effort. And while all of this was going on, derivatives of the formidable F-119 were selected to power both contenders in the new Joint Strike Fighter competition for the U.S. Air Force, the U.S. Navy, the U.S. Marine Corps, and the British Royal Navy. After more than 20 years, Pratt & Whitney would be producing a new engine for the Navy. The first production F-22 was unveiled at Lockheed Martin's Marietta, Georgia plant on April 9, 1997.
Today, we are pleased to officially name the F-22 after a special class of fierce and proud winged warriors. Today, we name the F-22 the Raptor.
What you are building, if you build it right, if you dedicate yourself to perfection, will allow people across the planet to be free for the next half century, will allow America to lead the world for the next half century. And someday down the road, because of your dedication and your hard work, the pilot is going to return safe, who might otherwise have died. What you are doing is patriotism at its most important and at its best. And on behalf of that pilot and their spouse and their children, I want to thank each and every worker everywhere across this country who are helping America remain the leader of freedom.
On September 7, 1997, we witnessed the flawless first flight of Raptor 01.
Okay, control, I'm ready for engine start. You're clear left engine start. Here comes the throttle lag. Right. Throttle is in idle. Rotation. 10%. Flight off at 22. Okay, canopy's coming down. Dobbins ground, Raptor 22, flight of 3, F-22 from spot 53 on the south side. Raptor 06 and 19, the F-16s from the guard ramp. Taxi. Am I cleared to go? You are clear. Power's coming up. Release brakes now. Everything looks good. A little fast on the climb. Coming back. Baby gets right on up here. Feels real good, PA. Good ride. Yep, great ride. Tower Raptor 22 is rolling out at 3.6 miles.
Raptor 22, you clear to land, wind 140 at 4.
And now, 1998. 40 years, 4 decades, a full generation and more of engineers, designers, assemblers. It was a year marked by yet another landmark event, the first 2 JSF-119 engines to test in an unprecedented time, a mere 18 months after the contract award. This was also the first time in history that 2 different new Pratt Whitney engines went to test at the same time. Together, the F-119, the Lockheed JSF-119, and the Boeing JSF-119 represent the evolution of a new dynasty, a new family of engines in the tradition of the Wasp and the F-100. 1998. The Florida facility is now called Pratt Whitney Large Military Engines. Division President Ansel Tukes shares his vision of the future.
Being assigned to Pratt, Florida was certainly a joy to me. When I came to Florida, I found a wonderful place, a place that my predecessors and all the people that have worked here for many years had built a very fine business. So first of all, I came into a very nice situation. We have a wonderful market position on our military business here, built on a long tradition of strong technology. I can't think of a better place to be in the aerospace industry than at Pratt & Whitney, and particularly on the government side of the business. So we're in the front line of the fighters for the U.S. Air Force. We have a majority of wins around the world for application of the F-100 engine in both F-15s and F-16s. We have the 119 engine, which is a foundation of power for the F-22 and for the Joint Strike Fighter. Our tradition here, based on gas turbine technology, is just as important on the space side. As you well know, our liquid space operations are centered here, and Angie Negron is doing a fantastic job leading that business and developing markets and technology. I think one of the most important parts of our success is the way we relate to one another. And Pratt & Whitney here in West Palm Beach, our Florida operations are truly a family. And that's why it's easy for us to build strong development teams. Our IPD process is based on communicating between people, and we certainly have a spirit of core that I believe is key to our success in the past, today, and for the future.
40 years.
I kind of divided into 4 chapters, if you will, from a culture. The 60s were highly exciting, experimental work, more challenges than you could possibly imagine. Technically, how to get things done, we were pushing the frontiers in everything. Extremely exciting. Our program, the J-58, the RL-10, all the way down through the trenches, everybody was turned on. So that's the 60s. The 70s, I would put in, the 2 things happened. One, we won the big one. All of a sudden, man, we have the F-100 program, and we've got to produce, because our engine is in every leading fighter in the United States. The supremacy of the skies rests on, from a propulsion standpoint, rests on these kids. We got to make it happen. So I would say the 70s was the make or break us as a division. Became a division in 1976. And we did it, not without a lot of trouble, not without a lot of setback. I always felt that place out there performed best under pressure. Now, I know all the program management theories that you shouldn't ever get into that situation. Well, that's the way the world is, you do. But I've never seen a team produce under pressure the way that bunch did. On the F-100, on the F-119 later, you could see it. We were at our best under those circumstances. So that was the 70s. The 80s, the great engine war. All of a sudden, we brought this lion into the tent, and in the eyes of our customer, our tent was too small. And so he decided, and it's his right to do so, we should have an engine competition. But the 80s was the great engine war, which consumed us too. And then for now, the 90s is the 119 and the legacy that will give as we move into the fighters of the future. Thank God we're in the two that are on the boards now, the F-22 and the JSF. So our challenge, our legacy, if you will, is how to win the next.
$40
I wish I was starting all over because it's, I think it's rewarding to see technology that the jet era, which is about 50 years old now, in my opinion, is only about halfway through its life. And all the things that we did and accomplished were due to one thing, our people. Sounds corny, but it's true. Without them, we'd had nothing.
42 years have been very quick, and it seemed like just yesterday I started. If I had to do it all over again, I wouldn't change a thing.
It was a very happy time. It was a time when people loved to come to work. They were so devoted to making this equipment work. They would spend all kinds of extra hours at it. And it's hard to explain. People felt. So everybody was just very happy with the job.
And then to win, when John Balaguer said in April of 1991, April 23rd, that day will stick in infamy, that we had won. The ATF program was very exciting. Everybody was in tears, hugging each other and having a great time. And then when we saw the final airplane, which is our production model, fly just last year out of Marietta, we were all thrilled and proud. And everybody at Pratt Whitney has the right to be proud of doing a great job and making our country have air dominance for all our grandkids in the future.
Well, the world has changed irrevocably in these 4 decades. Some things seem strangely familiar. Again, we held our breath as a national hero, 77-year-old John Glenn, blasted into space. This time, aboard the Pratt & Whitney-powered space shuttle. Pratt & Whitney's Florida facility is perhaps a little less remote now. But the challenges are as exciting, as demanding as they were 40 years ago. And the promises for the future are even more inspiring. Listen. Fighter pilots call it the sound of freedom. It echoes all we have been, all we are, and all we will be. It's the sound of pride, hope, and glory. 40 years, that thunder in the sun has been our daily declaration of triumph.
It's an early summer evening in an airfield in Georgia. The tension as palpable as the humidity. A new plane is scheduled to make its first flight tomorrow, and things have to go well. The F-22 Raptor is a fighter for the next century. This conglomeration of titanium, aluminum, and thermoplastics incorporates bold and forward-thinking designs. It possesses speed, stealth, and flight control systems designed to give its pilot overwhelming superiority against the current and future enemy weapon systems. It's the fighter that today's children may fly tomorrow. With it, they will be masters of future air war, capable of overwhelming an enemy into submission. More than 10 years of work and complicated web of contractors and subcontractors in 46 states have gone into producing this next-generation fighter. But already the Raptor has a troubled past. First, the Air Force made demands for fighter capabilities, but no one was sure they could be met. The funding cuts caused restructuring and repeated delays in development. A prototype crash. A subsequent version had so many problems, its first test flight was delayed for months. The plane has faced and still faces criticism from advocates of other planes and from Congress, which has been fretting over the F-22's cost. The last thing the plane's supporters need now is a bungled test flight that adds to the criticism and further clouds the future. The people who know this plane immediately believe this is what America needed for the future. They are as ardent in the support for the F-22 as the critics are opposing in it.
Like coined the phrase once upon a time, so there are going to be two kinds of airplanes. There's F-22s and there's targets.
But there are tests to be passed, and tomorrow will be one of them. Inside Building B1 at Lockheed Martin Aeronautical Systems in Marietta, Georgia, a deceptive peacefulness hangs over the assembly line. Work here is also done after months of preparation. An aircraft assembled here will take flight for its first time. A major milestone for even the simplest airframe. Sitting on a ramp some 2 miles away, the F-22 is not scheduled to take off for at least 6 hours, but already crew members are hard at work. They double-check and triple-check every last inch of the aircraft. Absolutely no one wants their assembly, their system, their one small piece in this $187 million puzzle to go awry. In fact, components on the ship 4002, as the aircraft is known here, have been meticulously tested and retested ever since the plane rolled out of the assembly hangar in February, some 4 months ago now. The day has come for this aircraft's maiden flight. The F-22 cannot stumble. The Raptor must accomplish what is called a flight with no squawks. That is a test flight that goes off without a hitch. At 5 a.m., the pace of preparations starts to pick up. No detail, however small, can be overlooked. Not even the removal of a potentially damaging pebble. A cleaning truck patrols the ramp area, vacuuming up such debris. Lockheed Martin's security officer, Patty Howarth, holds a quick briefing to remind her staff of their priorities.
Everybody forgot everything they learned on how to drive on the flight line, and every single person who had a flight line task was after driving on Friday. Everyone.
Howarth will spend the rest of the morning making sure her security team keeps the taxiway clear. Then, she will join on the rescue teams standing by, to assist with security in the case something goes wrong. Patty also worked on the security detail when Ship 1 flew for the first time.
It was probably one of the greatest days of my life. I've never really been involved in aircraft, and I thought, oh, it'll just be another day. But it was probably 110 the first day it lifted off, and I had goosebumps going up my spine.
As the sun rises, responsibilities are handed off from the night crew to the crew that will launch the plane. Crew Chief Terry Beyer oversees it all, supervising every crew member working on the F-22 today. He's been up since 2 a.m.
A very vested personal interest. Very little sleep last night. Toss and turn. It's been 8 years to get this far, so we're looking forward to a fun day.
Among Bayer's responsibilities this morning is ensuring all instrumentation and systems are functioning, so the team can get data on the plane's performance. That data will flow back to a control room here at Marietta.
It's very important in the program, and we've demonstrated not only to the company people, but to the general America and Congress that this airplane can be built here in Marietta, and we have competent people. We've decreased our build time here by over 3 months, and the number of write-ups that we have left open to do is down to a handful of write-ups versus the first airplane. We had significant things that we had to fix when we come back, as far as things that we couldn't complete to go fly.
Bayer believes that won't be the case this time, but he won't know for sure until his flight is over. The man with the best vantage point to compare Ship 1 and Ship 2 is test pilot Paul Metz. Metz, who flew Raptor 1 on its first flight, is a former U.S. Air Force fighter pilot with more than 7,000 hours flight time and more than 33 years of experience. He's been the chief test pilot for the F-22 program since 1992.
How dangerous is my job? They don't sell insurance too readily to us for this job, but quite frankly, the job has become much safer and much more controlled. If you look back to the early days of flight test, there were a great number of losses of life in aircraft. We're actually able to use simulators today to predict very, very well what we're going to see.
After several flights in the first F-22, Metz thinks the aircraft will endure itself to future pilots in a number of ways.
From the simple things like amazingly soft landings and the ability to feel really good about yourself when you come back from a flight in terms of your ability to fly it, to extreme maneuverability, to cockpit displays and information that are beyond the realm of the current fighter pilot to envision, and the ability to sneak around in space without people seeing you. All of these things together make for a tremendous package, and the fighter pilots of the future are going to point to the F-22 as their favorite. I'm sure of that.
On the ramp, the ground crew continues working. Byers is already pacing. Dan Stevens is the senior avionics technician for the F-22 program. He's responsible for the computers and other electronics on the aircraft to make sure they are functioning and ready when the pilot gets into the cockpit. Backing him up are a team of experts for every computer on the plane.
We actually have IPT engineers that are ready for their systems as they develop problems and answer any questions. If I have a question, that I know who to go to. We have experts on every component on the aircraft.
The F-22's pioneering electronics are perhaps the crew's biggest source of worry. They've undergone extensive testing, and Stephen believes most of the problems have been ironed out. But until this plane executes a flawless flight, Stevens won't be able to relax.
All of us are putting quite a bit of effort into it to see that it makes its goals, and especially this flight this morning. We're very proud of this aircraft, and we know it's going to take us through this millennium and beyond.
The pride comes from long hours. Flight test engineer Hal Wyeth has been on the ramp since 3:30 a.m.
Well, I broke a little sweat, but we're doing real good.
His team has actually been running final checks since last night. But for Wyeth and his crew, the payoff will come the same way it did with Ship 1, with a successful flight. Wyeth recalls how he felt watching the flight of the first F-22.
When he actually rotated and broke ground, it was a great feeling after all the effort that's been put in by so many people. You get a little lump in your heart, that kind of thing.
Today, however, the emotions may run deepest for this man. Vincent Davino is the team leader for airworthiness and delivery crew. He's been sheepherding the F-22 from the beginning, sweating the details for 10 years.
I couldn't begin to count them. And you're looking at everything here from the airplane readiness, fueling, security of the ramp, making sure you have the right number of people and the right skills aboard. There's quite a few things that go into
They're saying the airplane's ready for flight.
But this will be the last time Davino has to officially worry about a flight. After 4 decades in the business, he's retiring. Into failed or delayed test flights is not how he wants to end his career.
A lot of emotion that goes along with it.
Like,
there's a lot of time and 42 years of experience in this business about to come to a close here.
As it sits on the map this morning, the Raptor is just a couple of miles from where it was assembled, but Ship 2 is years removed from its birth, and in terms of technology, light years beyond its ancestors. The impetus for the F-22 began in 1981, when the Air Force announced that it needed a new air superiority fighter. Fighters such as the French Rafale, the Eurofighter Typhoon, and new generations of Russian Sukhoi and MiG have steadily reached parity with, and in some cases surpassed, the F-15. Additionally, Russian-made SA-10 and SA-12 air defense missiles could shoot down an F-15. They were for sale to any country with enough money to buy them. So the Air Force began looking for a new fighter that, once again, would allow the US to leapfrog the lethal competition.
The F-22 is going to help us own the skies, and owning the skies is what will allow us to dominate future battlefields in a way that will enable every other part of our military force, whether it be forces on the ground, at sea, or in the air. Owning the sky makes everything else work.
The new fighter would need the classic ingredients of air superiority: speed and agility, comprehensive situational awareness, the ability to shoot before being seen, and the ability to elude ground threats. But the Air Force decided it wanted to look far into the future, to a fighter that would be superior starting in 2004, and dominate at least 25 years beyond that. That meant a huge leap into the next millennium for the aircraft designers. They would have to predict future enemy capabilities and concoct a fighter that could respond with overwhelming superiority. But asking manufacturers to look that far ahead was like asking designers at the P-51 to foresee the impact of jet propulsion and predict the development of the F-4 Phantom 25 years later. Design teams look for the 1980s equivalent of the development of jet propulsion. They found it in the computer. By 1986, a profound shift away from massive mainframe computers had begun with the miniaturization of electronics that opened new possibilities for design of the fighter for the next millennium. Under development at the time was stealth technology. Stealth modifies a plane's physical characteristics, primarily its external surfaces and heat signatures, to reduce its radar profile. The Air Force had already begun huge leaps in stealth with its F-117 fighter and B-2 bomber. Strategists have called for such an aircraft as the need and development for small expeditional forces to respond to regional conflicts around the globe. The stealth aircraft offered a perfect fit for such operations in that it could carry out a mission quickly, with precision, without detection, and without the need for support aircraft. And stealth became a requirement for the new fighter. The Air Force also demanded that it fly at supersonic speeds without afterburner. Designers, mindful of the requirement for domination in the next century, also proposed a fighter that used easily upgradable computers. The computers would provide the pilot seamless situational information.
To get on top of it, and it's coming back downhill.
Computers would also coordinate with the other stealth technology to deny the enemy information about the plane's whereabouts. The idea was to have a plane that would give its pilot first look, first shot, first kill capabilities, then zoom away undetected, until the initial targets exploded. A third consideration arose from Congress. Federal budget constraints likely would limit the number of planes built, so the new fighters would have to be more with fewer numbers. They would have to be more destructive and deadly, and allow the US to win quickly and decisively, with minimal casualties to Americans.
This airplane is the future of our country. It will allow us to own the skies over any future battlefield, and owning the skies over those battlefields is going to keep Americans alive. And that's what the mothers and fathers of America are going to want.
But this futuristic vision required a lot of work. The avionics goal alone seemed huge. In 1986, close to impossible. Computers that could handle all the plane's requirements didn't exist. Design teams fretted over whether they could pull off this new airplane. Nevertheless, they forged ahead. In 1986, the Air Force selected 2 teams of defense contractors, Lockheed, Boeing, General Dynamics, and Northrop McDonnell Douglas, to build prototype airplanes known as the YF-22 and the YF-23. Engine makers Pratt Whitney and General Electric were selected to build prototype engines, and all the Air Force would have 4 versions of this new plane to consider. The prototypes materialized and began test flights in 1990. Northrop McDonnell Douglas's YF-23 was a graceful aircraft with forward fuselage resembling a gooseneck stretched out in flight. Its wings created a clipped diamond pattern with all edges swept forward or back by 40 degrees. When viewed from above, its broadly angled twin tails propelled the wing's leading edges. The YF-22 supported a slightly more conventional look, particularly in its shapely jutting twin tails and the more triangular shape of its wings. Designers of both planes incorporated several key developments in stealth, high-speed cruising, and avionics. To increase the fighter's stealth, designers reshaped internal and external parts of the aircraft. They changed how they treated its external surfaces through coating and irregular shapes. Designers also manipulated the plane's heat emissions to mask the fighters from infrared or heat-seeking detectors. The engine makers helped by reducing the need for afterburner to go supersonic. Also modified were the fighter's noises and colors to make it harder to detect by sonar and by the human eye. Ultimately, the fighter's radar cross-section, the element most crucial to foiling the enemy, was reduced until it resembled radar signature of birds and bees. Speed was another way the designers boosted the fighter's air superiority. Conventional fighters get their supersonic speeds through afterburner. But this consumes excessive amounts of fuel and can be used only for a short amount of time. The F-22 Pratt Whitney engines can develop 35,000 pounds of thrust and push the Raptor to well above Mach 1 without using afterburner. That means the fighter can fly at supersonic speeds for longer periods of time, giving it a greater range of operation and enemies less time to react. Designers call this capability supercruise. It significantly exceeds the capabilities of engines powering the Air Force current F-15 and F-16 fighters. Finally, the designers incorporated the latest developments into computers to create avionics that give the pilots superior situational awareness. Everything a fighter pilot needs to know, from the location of his wingman and his target to enemy aircraft and radar sectors, is combined into a series of easily understood displays. An enemy aircraft is a red triangle, an unidentified aircraft is a yellow square. Our green square is a friendly aircraft. Wingmen are in blue. All the pilot has to do is to glance down to his situational display and instantly grasp the battlefield around them.
In fact, we bring in people who have no flight experience whatsoever, put them in the concept demonstrator, and let them use displays that are very close, very similar to what's actually in the airplane. And to a person, they can operate the systems, lock onto targets, and destroy enemy aircraft.
Finally, the Air Force demanded that this new fighter demonstrate superior agility. On the YF-23, agility was attained through traditional means, aerodynamics and flight control surfaces. But the YAF-22 added thrust vectoring, using nozzles on the back of the engine to direct thrust up or down. With thrust vectoring, the YF-22 achieved a record-high angle of attack, 60 degrees, an angle that would stall most other aircraft.
I now announce.
In April 1991, U.S. Air Force Secretary Dr. Donald Rice announced that the YF-22 with its Pratt Whitney F-119 engines would be the design for its future advanced tactical fighter, citing better capabilities and lower costs. The Air Force awarded the winning team a $9.5 billion contract. While design work began on the newly dubbed F-22, the Air Force continued test flights on the YF version. On April 22, 1992, while returning to Edwards Air Force Base in California, the YF-22 began oscillating severely, 40 feet above the runway. Pilot was unable to regain control. The YF-22 crashed and burned.
The Air Force's prototype YF-22 aircraft crashed April 25th at Edwards Air Force Base as the pilot was completing a practice approach over the runway.
The investigation into the crash of the YF-22 tied it to the thrust vectors. They had been left on during the landing and contributed to the oscillation as the pilot moved that control stick. The crash was labeled a pilot error. The pilot himself wrote off the crash and walked away from the airplane. F-22 Chief Test Pilot Paul Metz joined the F-22 program shortly afterwards.
The problem was one of having a prototype flight control system that was not designed to be used in that flight environment. It had some sensitivity, some known sensitivity. And unfortunately, it caught that particular pilot on that particular day and caused the resulting accident.
The thrust vectors were integrated into the flight controls, eliminating the need to turn them on and off. Now, they automatically interpret the pilot's movements on the aircraft stick. The harder a pilot pulls on the stick, the more thrust vectoring the flight control system will provide.
All those commands from the pilot go through a computer, and the computer then manipulates or modulates those control surfaces depending on the flight conditions. I like to think of the vector as simply being like a bigger aerodynamic tail on the airplane. They make the airplane move and pitch, and the pilot has no idea that part of that pitch is from the engines, part of the pitch for horizontal tail. It's all transparent.
While the crash was a setback for the F-22 program, the Air Force's interest in the fighter never diminished.
My position for about 10 miles.
Impact.
Operation Desert Storm in 1991 proved that a fighter with its capabilities was still needed.
I think we expect what we saw in Desert Storm, that is a clear, decisive, overwhelming show of force that ended the war very quickly with a minimal loss of life of our people. In the future, we should expect that of all of our equipment.
Port 70, you got privilege in front of you, will I? Yeah, I can.
But the Gulf War raised the expectations of the American public for decisive conflicts of short duration. However, Desert Storm also reminded the F-22 designers of the need to be more flexible and ready to react to new problems, such as Iraq's Scud missile, for example.
Many of our requirements were modified as a result of lessons learned in the Gulf War. Hard to find relocatable launch targets, for example, was one of the phenomena that was a fairly significant problem for the U.S. forces. some of our systems on the airplane are designed to deal with that.
The F-22 design team also had to react to rapid and ongoing changes in computer systems. In fact, one of the aircraft's newer features is flexibility for expansion and swapping out components. Capacity is available within the aircraft to add computer processor power. No hard mock-up of the plane was created. Instead, manufacturing plants in Fort Worth, Seattle, West Palm Beach, Florida, and East Hartford, Connecticut all relied on computer-generated models for such key components. At final assembly in Marietta, these major sections of the aircraft fit remarkably well. In fact, Lockheed Martin claims that some tolerances were accurate to within 1/6000th of an inch. The development that proved most difficult to cope was with the ongoing downsizing of the US military. The shrinking defense dollar at times hurt the fighter's development. The Defense Secretary William Cohen warned Congress that it would have to close more bases to pay for all the weapon systems if desired, but Congress shied away from that painful task. Fearful of the political repercussions that left new weapon systems, such as the F-22, vulnerable to the Pentagon budget acts. Against this backdrop of uncertain federal support, Lockheed Martin unveiled within fanfare its first F-22. On April 9, 1997, the company announced that this aircraft would take its first flight by the end of the following month. But that first F-22 stumbled badly out of the gate. One problem followed after another, and the program quickly fell 3 months behind. Finally, on September 7, 1997, Metz took the first F-22 into the air. That flight tested the aircraft's handling characteristics and engine performance through different power levels. It retracted the gear for a clean configuration to test handling, and it tested the aircraft in formation with an F-16. The roughly 1-hour flight demonstrated the plane could fly. Lockheed Martin and the Air Force called the problems that delayed the first F-22 minor, although the repairs were sometimes complicated. But the delays gave critics ammunition. A military cost review agency twice warned that the F-22 was a risk of billion-dollar cost overruns. Congress complained too many technical problems and too few test flights. Senators warned that this $187 million plane might be stuck dead if its price per copy kept climbing. The F-22 supporters responded by reminding Congress the fighter was far from a conventional aircraft. Thus, its cost and development were unpredictable.
In my personal opinion, this program has had an unprecedented focus on cost and cost control. We have been what's termed a cost reimbursable contract, principally because we're busting the frontiers of many new technologies on this program, and you can't very accurately predict where that's going to lead you as you bring these technologies online. If you look at this program in terms of its complexity from any historical measure, we believe we're going to deliver the airplane about 25% under what many outside experts think it should cost. So that's rather revolutionary in its own.
Haunted by criticism, this team at Lockheed Martin in Georgia redoubled its efforts. They have succeeded in getting the second F-22 ready for its test flight, a full 9 days ahead of schedule. But being ready is not the full measure of success, and the pressure for a perfect flight only increased. At 9 a.m., everyone who works on the F-22 flight line, from engineers to stockroom clerks, stops what they are doing and heads out to the runway.
We're doing a fire walk this morning, and fire is foreign object damage. Any item, a pebble, a rock, any MSP item that might happen to be on the runway could damage the engine. And we are out here this morning to prevent that from happening.
Flight walks are performed once or twice a week at fighter bases. But with this plane, FOD walks are done any time it is scheduled to have its engines running. The workers fan out and scan the pavement for anything that the vacuum truck may have missed.
Something that small can nick an impeller blade and cause it to be off balance. If it's bad enough, it comes apart just like a hand grenade in flight. So we want to be very careful that we get everything off the ramp that we can see.
At the end of the walk, all the workers' bags are carefully collected. There is no prize for the worker who turns into a bag with the most debris.
FOD-free airplane. That's the prize. No busted engines.
With the FOD walk completed, the ground crew begins at its last-minute check. Optimism runs high, but it's short-lived. Suddenly, there is a problem. A small hydraulic leak has been discovered. The pre-flight timetable is halted. For how long? No one knows. 2 hours have gone by. But relief and optimism return. The hydraulic leak has been fixed. Test pilot Paul Metz arrives. He greets Bayer, the crew chief, and the two duo walk around inspection of the fighter. The boom on the F-22's nose reflects the test phase of this aircraft. The antenna sprouting from it will send data streaming back to the small white building. This is the nerve center for the test flight. The building is full of engineers who monitor every system on the F-22 while it's in flight. The ground crew conducts another FOD walk. It's now 11 a.m., and an anxious crowd of Lockheed employees and curious reporters have gathered to watch this F-22 make its first leap skyward. Metz climbs into the cockpit. Bayer assists him in buckling up. Starting an F-22 is almost as easy as starting an antique car. Early designs required the pilot to complete 17 steps. But for all its complexity, this F-22 asked him to do just 3 things. Turn the battery on, push the auxiliary power, switch to start, and move both throttles to idle.
The airplane's actually very simple to operate. It only takes a few switches to get it started. And once we get it started, we have to go through a number of checks with the airplane to get it ready for flight.
Bayer signals to Metz to bring up the power. Metz talks to both the tower and the control room. Running through more checklists on the ground, Bayer, the crew chief, listens in and paces some more. Now, the plane is ready for its initial move or roll check. Metz eases the jet half-roll forward and taps the brakes. Bayer now begins signaling to Metz to head toward the runway. As he rolls out, Metz is engaged in a constant conversation with the control room, running checks for all his systems. He also talks to the pilot of the F-16 chase plane to coordinate takeoff and rendezvous. Metz taxis forward toward the runway, testing his rudder, closing down his engine nozzles. He stops again for what is called the last chance inspection. Bayer gives him a thumbs up and hands them over to the tower. The aircraft rolls to the head of the runway and prepares for takeoff. It is now 11:30 a.m. The chase plane heads out. The F-16 will be Metz's eyes outside of the plane, looking for problems, visually verifying all aspects of the test flight. Now, the moment has come. All the months of effort boiled down to a single motion of the left hand. Metz eases the throttle forward and adds power to the engines. A few breathless seconds later, Raptor 2 takes flight. Immediately, the newly born plane physically and visibly gives notice of its sheer power. The nose lifts higher as it surges into a gravity-mocking climb. It's an initial performance that, Metz later will admit, even surprised him. The F-16 must go to afterburner to keep up.
This is a real high point of the airplane. Pratt Whitney's done a fantastic job with the engines. They operate very, very smoothly with almost no vibration. You can tell no difference between idle and military power.
For all its excitement, the takeoff was not the culmination of today's effort. It was merely a beginning. There is a flight plan to be followed and tests to be done. According to that flight plan, Metz will fly a triangular route over Georgia. He will head north to Jasper, 40 miles away. Then turn west for a 46-mile leg. Then turn south and return to Dobbins and Marietta. After the initial climb, the F-22 slows to 200 knots and levels off. The gear stays down for the first test phase. While he cruises, Metz and the engineers run through checks of the aircraft systems, making sure all are working. Once everyone is convinced the plane is functioning correctly, it is time to check flight control systems. Time to make the Raptor move a little. The ailerons, the rudders, the thrust factors. As something moves, data goes streaming back to the white control building.
Here we're seeing some control motions with the rudder. Again, just relatively gentle maneuvers to see if the airplane responds just as was predicted in the simulations. And it did.
Now Metz brings the throttle forward again. The added power pushes the aircraft to 225 knots, and quickly, the two climb to 20,000 feet. Now comes a critical step. The landing gear is tested. It retracts smoothly and is lowered again. Then raised for good. Putting the gear up represents an act of faith that it'll come back down. The first phase of the test flight is complete. It has not only gone smoothly, it has been perfect.
Bring the gear up and take a look at the characteristics of the airplane and what we call a clean configuration. Landing gear comes up, and once it does, the airplane is very, very smooth. There's absolutely no buffet, and characteristics are excellent.
Everything done with the gear down is now repeated. Checking how the F-22 handles, how the engines respond.
Again, with the gear up, we'll look at some of those relatively mild handling qualities characteristics, such as bank-to-bank rolls, and some of the control inputs. And again, the airplane is very quick, very cat-like and agile in the response.
40 minutes into flight, another milestone test. Metz and the F-16 show the F-22's ability to fly in formation.
And we use the cameraman as a director in this case to help me make relatively rapid and quick changes in position while flying the wing of the F-16 here.
Finally, nearly an hour later, the test flights are over. There's just one thing left to do.
Coming in close to final, the airplane floats very nicely, can be flared, and touches down very softly.
As they land, Metz holds up Raptor's nose to help slow the plane.
Once on the ground, we hold the nose up for aero braking to bleed off some airspeed. I deployed the speed brakes just as the nose came down for touchdown. And that also helps dissipate the airspeed.
With about 5,000 feet of runway remaining, brakes are applied, bringing the F-22 down to a fairly slow speed to finish the rollout.
Handling characteristics in the landing phase are really delight. It'll make any pilot feel proud to bring the airplane back and land it. It's a very easy airplane to land.
As the spectators applaud, Metz brings forward the F-22 over towards them and lets the plane take a bow.
These are the folks that are really responsible for getting me in the air. And there are thousands of people, not only in Marietta, but Seattle, Fort Worth, Pratt Whitney, and the suppliers around the United States, and in fact around the world, that struggled for a long time to put this airplane together.
Back at the ramp, the ground crew cheers. Metz leaves the cockpit. There are handshakes and photos all around for a successful test flight. It was by the book.
The flight profile was flown exactly as we had planned it out, and absolutely no anomalies on the airplane. It's ready to go again. Don't have a squawk on either the instrumentation or the airframe itself.
Anything unexpected, either good or bad?
Well, you probably saw it on the climb out here. We rotated up to the climb at about 3/4 field and really rocketed on up there. And both myself and the chase pilot both remarked that was a lot spiffier performance than we saw with number one. And I can't explain it because it's a hotter day, but it really went upstairs today.
With the plane safely back on the ramp, Bayer can finally stop pacing.
Well, I guess a lot of things go through your mind. I mean, you think about fuel, you think about electrical power, but mainly is great feeling jumping off, and made a few bets with the ground crew of how bad the airborne pickup would be. But Colonel Rainey hit it pretty good. He was right with him.
Elation is pervasive among the ground crew.
Fantastic. Got this airplane in the air early, got it back, no squawks on it, perfect.
This successful test flight does much today to chase away the program's demons. The F-22 team has proven it can deliver a test flight early and with flawless results. That should go far in helping others focus on what is really the aircraft's key selling points: its maneuverability and speed, according to Metz.
The most striking thing that you see when you get in it is the raw power. And that's what's going to be an eye-opener to the operational pilot.
With its flawless test flight behind it, this F-22 will stick to its schedule and fly again in 2 days. After that, it will undergo some minor modifications, then be test flown about a half dozen more times. If those go well, the aircraft will then be ferried to Edwards Air Force Base in California, what will join the first F-22 in future test flights. The naysayers in Congress, meanwhile, will be forced to consider that this plane made its test flight 9 days early without a single hitch, and demonstrated some exciting fighter capabilities.
I think the reliability we're seeing and our ability to hold to schedule with this complex system are both very strong testimony to the fact that the program's coming together.
Bayer agrees.
Well, I think it proves to Congress and the United States Air Force that Lockheed Martin can build a reliable fighter on time and below budget. The crews come together and they know what they're doing, and we worked through some trying times on the first aircraft, but we learned, and that's the biggest thing it showed. We learned from the difficulties we had, and we've overcome them, and now we're a month ahead of schedule.
Now, Bayer is ready to announce the last step. Today for the crew, it's not more testing or more analysis or even reviews, although those will surely go on as well.
Well, I think everybody's going out tonight and unwind a little bit, have a good time. So we'll enjoy ourselves.
Aviation, the art of aeronautics, began with the dreamers, inventors, and daredevils who dared to defy gravity. The journey of aviation was nurtured by pioneers like the Wright brothers, whose first flight marked a historic milestone. The role of aircrafts in world wars was groundbreaking, dramatically changing warfare strategies. This initiated a technological evolution in aviation, transforming the simplistic wings of a biplane into the thunderous roar of jet engines. Let's journey through the ages of aviation. Behind every great aircraft, there were great minds. These visionaries, like Sir Frank Whittle, the innovator of the turbojet engine, redefined air travel. Then there's Skunkworks' Kelly Johnson, the genius behind the SR-71 Blackbird. His designs combined speed, stealth and power, crafting machines that dominated the heavens. The contributions of these pioneers have left an indelible mark on the canvas of aviation, shaping the course of history and inspiring generations of engineers and aviators. Each epoch in aviation history gave birth to extraordinary aircrafts, each with their own unique features and roles. The Lockheed SR-71 Blackbird was a marvel of speed and stealth. The F-105 Thunderchief, a supersonic fighter bomber, was vital in the Vietnam War. The P-51 Mustang, a long-range fighter, was critical in World War II. The P-47 Thunderbolt, a heavyweight fighter, was used extensively in the same war. The A-10 Thunderbolt II, the Warthog, is a close air support icon. The Messerschmitt Me-262 marked a leap forward in aviation technology. Each of these game changers were instrumental in their eras, and their legacies still resonate today. Beyond the game changers, there are those that have transcended their practical roles to become icons. The Concorde was not just an aircraft, it was a supersonic symbol of luxury and speed. The B-52 Stratofortress, a strategic bomber, is an icon of power and resilience. These magnificent machines and others like them have become much more than just aircrafts. They are enduring icons that encapsulate the audacious spirit, the relentless innovation, and the boundless ambition that define the world of aviation. For more amazing aerial footage, and to join us in this incredible journey, check out the DroneScapes YouTube channel.
If you enjoyed this video, please remember to like and subscribe. And as always, thank you for watching.